Today's tournament was the inaugural Sub-Junior Country Championship. That's for youngsters 12 to 17 years. Stewart went in as equal favourite with Mark Hensby of Tamworth. Both play off a handicap of 1. He is regarded as a real star of the future with his attitude to training and his obvious ability. He won today by just the 1 shot from Luke Parsons of Orange, who was 3 over the card. While the girls had more trouble with the course, which is in beautiful condition, local star Danielle Heaton from the adjoining club Tuggerah Lakes won also by just 1 from Cessnock's Dale Linnetson. The tournament was sanctioned by the Jack Newton Foundation, whose executive director Greg Mills was on hand to cast an eye over things. And he liked what he saw.
A rematch with Ivory
When
Lightning,
they coined the
Norm
phrase
thinks he
Rough
can
Rider,
still
they
get in the
must have
money
had
with his
Toowoomba
draw,
cowboy
Daddy
Norm
Cool.
Hilton in mind. He's one of the best bull riders in Australia and one of only a handful of professional cowboys. But last weekend at Scone, Norm took on a bull by the name of Casper in the local rodeo.
I remember starting the bull and I remember bucking off and getting hung up to him. They're swinging me around by the arm and jumping all over me, and next thing I remember they were loading me in the ambulance, and there's a lot of pain involved.
Norm is now recovering in the intensive care ward of the Royal Newcastle Hospital with serious injuries. He has 2 collapsed lungs, fractured ribs and a fractured pelvis. It's not the first time Norm has been injured plying his trade. A year ago at Tamworth, he copped a broken jaw from this incident. He rates the latest spill as his worst buster, but says he'll be back as soon as the soreness goes.
No, this is the worst injury I've had, yeah.
But you keep coming back to it. Why do you just keep getting back on the bulls?
Oh, it's my job. I guess it's a hard question to answer. It's the same as why does a race car driver keep getting back in the cars?
After this one and all the pain, have you had sort of second thoughts about your job?
No, I'll be back on in a couple of months' time.
The Department of Main Roads is considering 3 main options for the construction of the Wakefield to Minmi section of the National Highway. An eastern route, which would be the most expensive at $78 million, a central route which would cost $68 million but which would render valuable mining land useless, and a western route which appears to have the least number of problems. The options are contained in this environmental impact study released by the DMR several weeks ago. Members of the Barnsley, Edgeworth and Killingsworth residents group have decided that they will push hard to get the DMR to opt for the western option. They claim it is away from residential areas and would cause less noise and visual pollution. Why is that option better than any other?
Well, we believe it's better because our reasons are that there will be no homes to be demolished. It'll be away from residential areas. There'll be no flooding problems, less noise and visual pollution. We believe the western route is the route that will have the least impact environmentally and economically on the local communities.
Is to decline a full place in the affairs of that land. Bound in the common loyalty to Australia, its institutions, Elizabeth II, Queen of Australia, her heirs and successors according to
the worm
so early that it's
For some
not even
years
really
now,
a
the Australian
cancer,
Medical
and it can be
Association has
easily
claimed there is a growing
treated
oversupply of
and
doctors in
cancer
Australia.
prevented.
Their solution to this
Okay,
perceived
well,
problem
we've talked
is to
about
reduce the number of doctors trained in Australia by 30%. This would clearly have a marked effect on the country's medical schools, with the smaller ones like Newcastle least able to absorb the impact. Earlier this week, Federal Health Minister Neil Blewett announced an inquiry into medical education and the number and type of doctors required in the future. That inquiry is expected to run all year, but as far as the Dean of the Medical Faculty at Newcastle is concerned, the future of his school is secure.
I think the things that we're doing are well regarded, and people want to see it going on, and some people are changing their own programme in response to our experience, and we're learning from other programmes. No, I don't believe that closing down is on the agenda.
So the future of the Newcastle Medical School is secure?
Well, yes, I'll say yes, because I really believe so, and I certainly think it should be.
The submarine HMAS Onslow cruised into Newcastle Harbour shortly before 10 o'clock today and docked at the No. 4 Lee Wharf in readiness for the weekend celebrations. The Onslow was built in Scotland around 20 years ago. She is nearly 100 metres long and carries a complement of 7 officers and 55 sailors. The Onslow is equipped with 8 torpedo tubes and is capable of firing anti-ship and anti-submarine torpedoes. Later in the day, the Navy patrol boat HMAS Fremantle also arrived in the port. The British-built Fremantle is one of 15 relatively new patrol boats in the Navy, but she looked no bigger than a model as she was dwarfed by a big Russian tanker that pulled through the heads of nobbies at the same time. The ship's company is 3 officers and 19 sailors. The Fremantle is equipped with a satellite navigation system and is used extensively to patrol the 200-mile Australian coastal limits. Both vessels will be docked in the harbour throughout the weekend, and both will be open to the public each afternoon for the 3 days. The field for the tournament includes some big-name internationals, but after today's round at Belmont, at least some of them might be wishing they'd stayed at home. Colin Montgomery is the Scottish champion and the unofficial world amateur champ, but that aside, he only managed a 3-over par 75 today. It was a similar story for American Eric Woods, who plays off +3. He had trouble on the greens and carded 2 over for the 18 holes. The successes today all belong to young Australian players. 21-year-old Queenslander Stephen Taylor set the pace early in the day and finished around 1 o'clock with a 4-under par 68. The other early finishers who carded well included Charlestown's Mark Jackson, who finished 3-under 67. Clark Joyce broke the course record with an 8-under par 64 earlier this week and was with the leaders with 2-under today. One of the last players to come home, though, stole the lead. Stephen Conran from Orange in the Central West carded a 5-under par 67 in a great round of golf. The second 18 starts tomorrow morning with the final 36 holes played on Monday.
Barefoot water skiing doesn't look easy, and it isn't. According to 21-year-old Peter Wellham, it's taken 10 years of dedication and determination to make it this far. Over the long weekend on the banks of the Molonglo River near Canberra, Peter outmatched Australia's top skiers to defend his title in the men's overall division of the Masters Barefoot Championships. Back home at Fennell Bay, the champ, now rated 3rd in the world, says there's no time to relax if he hopes to make his mark on this year's competitive circuit.
The future more or less kicks off in about a month's time, the New South Wales state title. That looks like being down in Sydney at this stage. Then following that, the Australian titles in April, the South Pacific titles also in April, leading up to the next World Titles, which at this stage look like being in Melbourne, Australia in '88.
Back into fifth position.
The Masters Classic is a prelude to the National Titles Grand Final, which will also be run at the Motordrome. Current Australian champion Tony Giancola will be joined by 6 other West Australian drivers, including Barry Blake, John Cardy, Peter Morgan, Bert Vosbergen and Ben Ludlow. A feature of the night's racing will be the American Valvoline team, including Combs, Godsey, Moran and Chamberlain. It's the first time this season the experienced Americans will be competing against each other in open competition. Tomorrow night's program also includes hot rods, Formula 500s, UFO sprints and stock cars.
Nestled in the Upper Hunter, the education battle in the quiet country town of Moonan Flat has surprised most of the 30 residents. This is a primary school that Louisa Hayes was to take up her new position as resident teacher next week. But it was only to be for the first 8 days before she left on maternity leave to return later in the year. During that time, Miss Hayes, along with her de facto husband, would occupy the teachers' residence quarters adjacent to the school grounds. The P&C argued that the replacement teacher would have to travel long distances to the school, and that's when the problem started.
The residents at Moonan Flat's very important to attract a teacher out here, and she was going to live there for 12 months, tying the residents up, and it would mean that a temporary teacher would have to travel from Aberdeen or Scone or Muswellbrook and spend half a day on the road, and it's just not on, it's just not suitable.
The parents say they threatened to withdraw their children in an attempt to attract the Education Department's attention. But nothing happened until Ms Hayes requested and was granted a transfer. A press statement by the Minister followed. On the request of the teacher herself, she will be going to another school where she will be welcome and where her private life will be, as it should be, utterly irrelevant. The persecution of a pregnant woman is wholly reprehensible. I hope they feel proud of themselves. Louisa Hayes was unavailable for comment today. The Moonan Flat P&C insists they have nothing against her personally, but now say they're angry at the Education Department's lack of knowledge about the matter, which has resulted in allegations of persecuting a pregnant woman.
We haven't heard from the Minister. All the Minister's done is denigrate us in the Telegraph this morning. He's come out and said that we've persecuted this girl. We haven't persecuted the girl. All we're doing is bringing attention to the system. And the system is wrong, where a girl can tie up a residence, which is so important to a small school, and have a temporary teacher travel all this way to do the job that the teacher in the school should be doing. That's our grievance.
The jail was closed to visitors today after prison officers walked off the job. It's believed the dispute is over staffing levels and the number of officers required to escort prisoners. It's not the first time a manning dispute has affected the running of the jail. Last year, several disputes erupted over the proper manning of security towers. With the prison officers off the job, the jail's executive staff and police are taking care of security both inside and outside the jail. The prison officers will return to work at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning.
The Morisset Show is the start of the agricultural show season in the Hunter Valley. Thousands of competitors and exhibitors came from as far north as Tamworth and Armidale, west as Mudgee and south as Sydney and Wollongong. The show combines horticulture, agriculture and arts and crafts. In the ring, show jumping, stock horses, poultry and goats were the centre of attention, while Sideshow Alley kept the younger ones entertained. Organisers say this year's show was one of the biggest, and from Morisset it moves to Maitland, Cessnock and Newcastle, and then winds up in Sydney for the Royal Easter Show.
"17-month-old Luke Stewart of Nelson Bay was tinkering with his father's home brew when he dropped a bottle. The bottle exploded, spraying him with glass, cutting his stomach and just missing his liver. Luke's mother said she heard the noise and rushed to see what had happened. She was shocked to find her son covered in blood and bleeding from the stomach. She bundled him up and took him to a nearby doctor who arranged for the Westpac helicopter to take him to the Martin Hospital. Today, Luke is recovering in hospital, but his father Gary says it highlights the need for a hospital or polyclinic in the Nelson Bay area.
What we really need is a hospital up the bay. You know, it's something that, you know, there's a lot of people up there. It's a big tourist spot and all the rest of it. And we really desperately need some means of a hospital up there. The helicopter's not always on hand to be able to get it, and you know, it's quite a long drive, you know, to get down here if there's something seriously wrong with you. You can't even be stabilised up in the bay. You've got to get from there down to here to get stabilised.
The NRMA says the opening of the F3 freeway has resulted in more traffic on the old arterial roads in the Hunter. That traffic is being directed to different areas, along existing roads such as the Cessnock to Branxton stretch. The NRMA says it and others weren't designed to handle the extra traffic. Some stretches of main roads are narrow and rough, with potholes and unsealed edges, and with sometimes fatal results. 113 deaths were recorded in the region last year, an increase of 30 from the year before. The NRMA says urgent improvements need to be made if those figures are to be reduced.
Their present state is, as our Chief Executive says in this press release, not good enough to cope properly with today's traffic, and the situation will become worse as more traffic is moved onto them from the freeway.
Whose responsibility is it to rectify the situation?
The roads in the Hunter Valley that are subject to this report from our Traffic and Safety Department are under the care of the Department of Main Roads, Lake Macquarie City Council, Newcastle City Council and other local bodies.
The one adult and 2 juvenile birds were seized by officers from the National Parks and Wildlife Service. They've probably been in captivity for up to 10 days awaiting sale.
Our officers acted on some information we received about black cockatoo trapping. They went to a premises in a Newcastle suburb and found these birds in these small cages under the house.
What sort of condition were they in when they were found?
Well, not satisfactory conditions. The cages are far too small. Not enough room for them to exercise or stretch their wings or anything in them.
And what was likely to happen to them?
Information we have is that they were trying to get them into the local bird market.
And what sort of money would they fetch if they got into the market?
Well, locally they could, a pair of these birds could bring up to about $2,000. Overseas, 3 birds could be worth in the vicinity of $30,000.
Is it a major problem in Newcastle?
It's a fairly large problem, yes. Illegal trapping of birds.
And what sort of penalties do people face if they're caught?
Well, for actually having the birds in their possession illegally, $2,000 and or 6 months imprisonment. For the ill treatment of the birds, that could be $1,000 and or 6 months imprisonment.
There was some concern the birds might not be up to being released in the wild. One had no tail feathers, but given the chance for freedom, the three took off, hopefully avoiding any future encounters with illegal trappers.
Well, this year it's $21,000 at the beginning of the season, and then there's an incentive for the club. If the club makes the first grade grand final, it's another $4,000. If they win the competition, it's another $4,000. So the total will be $29,000 when they win the competition.
Sure. It extends right into the juniors and schoolboys this year, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, the club have said to us that they will decide how they spend the money, but they've indicated that they'll go right from the beginning of the juniors, right through the club, and they want to dissipate the money in such a way that everybody gets a benefit.
This has got to be the biggest rugby league sponsorship in Newcastle. You'd be happy to be involved in that, I guess.
We're very happy. I believe it is, and I think the incentive is there for other sponsors to come along and perhaps support the other clubs, because with money into the competition, it makes the competition so much stronger.
Club Secretary Alan Hextall took the opportunity to introduce the recent signings. Coach will be John McLeod, Carl Herden from Cowra, Barry Loring from Foster, the Queenslander Craig Mason, Norm Murray from the Sydney club Penrith, and former Australian Junior Rugby Union representative Andrew Johnson from up the valley at Scone.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much.
In recent times, the obelisk has made headline news. In June last year, it was a lucky escape for 8 schoolgirls when the lighting of firecrackers resulted in a gas explosion. And just last month, during an electrical storm, the favourite landmark on the hill was severely damaged by a lightning bolt. But over the past 5 weeks, the Hunter District Water Board, whose job it is to maintain the obelisk and surrounding park, has been repairing the historic navigational mark, which has welcomed visitors to Newcastle's harbour since 1850. Today, the 100-kilogram top section was replaced with the help of a crane, and now all that's needed is a good coat of paint.